Between our patients, our social circle, I don't even know how to estimate how many metric ton have been lost from using GLP-1s. Seriously, these drugs work, they're effective, they're incredible tools. That's not the debate. The debate is what you're losing, because the scale doesn't always tell you that. Muscle is an organ. It's the organ of longevity. It regulates your blood glucose. Muscle is what protects your joints from injury. Muscle is what's going to keep you out of a nursing home. If I asked you, hey, I can get that number on the scale down 10 more pounds, but I need to take out one of your kidneys, would you do it?
Sign me up. Welcome to MD Longevity Lab, where we're playing the long game. This is a podcast where science meets real life with expert insights, practical tips, and real-world tools to not only live longer, but live better. Our aim is to radically change the way medicine is practiced and enable individuals to age gracefully, maintaining health span and vitality well into their later years. We're your hosts, Dr. Nisha and Dr. Vikas Patel, physicians, partners in life, and parents balancing work, wellness, and everything in between. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the MD Longevity Lab podcast. Thanks for joining us. Anish, how is your week going?
It's been a long week, I gotta say, but it was very productive. And I did try my first ever reformer Pilates class this week.
How'd that go?
Well, considering I'm normally like a power lifter, not a Pilates girl, it was definitely new for me. My friend Kate teaches the class, and I was always intimidated, and she's been telling me to come, and I finally came. And truth be told, I always had this fear with those reformers, like I would somehow find a way to hang myself. It's like a medieval, torture device, and one of those wires that I would ruin the class, and just like that would be my end game, like final destination. I envisioned myself dying on a reformer.
You're ridiculous.
Well,
and it turns out you're alive. So
yeah.
How'd the class go?
As it turns out, I loved it. I thought it was way better than, let's say, floor Pilates or hot Pilates, for two reasons. I feel like it engaged all my muscle groups, and I was shaking by the end of the class. But a double whammy was I was pretty much in zone 2 the entire class. So for me, it was two birds with one stone, in that I was obviously doing mobility for Pilates, a little bit of strength training, and burning fat all at the same time. So I never went into zone 3. So I would 100% do it again.
I'm glad that you're a Pilates girl now.
There you have it, guys. I've been converted.
All right, let's get started on today's podcast. Question for the crowd. Have you heard of Ozempic?
Who has not heard of Ozempic? It's basically a household name at this point. Your neighbors on it, your friends on it, your coworkers on it. There's literally Saturday Night Live skits on it. And let's just acknowledge the literal elephant in the room, or the missing elephant in the room, because between our patients, our social circle, I don't even know how to estimate how many metric ton have been lost from using GLP-1s. Seriously, these drugs work, they're effective, they're incredible tools. That's not the debate. The debate is what you're losing, because the scale doesn't always tell you that. And that's the nuance of GLP-1s.
And I think that's the topic that we want to cover today. GLP-1s are genuinely revolutionary. The science behind them is extraordinary, but the conversation around them, at least in pop culture, has been either very oversimplified or polarized. Either these drugs are like complete miracles that just melt fat away while you're sleeping, or they're cheating and you're going to turn into a frail, muscle-wasted version of yourself.
Yeah. And as physicians and as people who have built a practice around evidence-based medicine, we want to have that real conversation with you, that that conversation that includes the biology, the data, the context, and honestly, the things that no one wants to say out loud.
So today, and I want to be upfront about this. This is a longer episode. It's actually a two-parter because there's genuinely just too much important science here to do justice in just one episode. So we're going to go pretty deep into GLP-1 receptor agonists, GIP agonists, dual agonists like tirzepatide, and then the brand new oral pill formulations that a lot of people don't even know are out there. And then we're also going to try and preview Reta or retatrutide, which is a triple agonist that's in late stage trials and may also kind of reset the ceiling on what's possible. I know there's a lot of people who are already unofficially taking Reta.
Yeah, they're buying it from like graymarket.com or Reddit threads. The number of times, if I had a nickel for every time a patient asked me, have you heard of Reta? Like Reta, like it's a name, but it's not. We'd be retired. But that's not the way life works. So part one today is a setup. We're going to discuss the evolutionary biology, the pharmacology, the new pill formats, and the remarkable benefits beyond just weight loss that are not getting enough attention. Part two, we're going to drop right alongside this in a few weeks. It's where we get into the hard stuff, muscle loss, clinical data, and what you need to be successful on the GLP-1s.
What happens when you stop them?
Right.
Because the compounding pharmacy situation is a wild west. So definitely look into a little bit on how to frame this. So we should also, Nisha brought up talking a little bit about the evolutionary biology behind this. I think that's important because if you can't understand why these drugs actually work so dramatically or why our modern food environment has truly created this problem in the first place, that is very helpful in setting up the mismatch between the bodies that we've inherited and kind of the world or environment that we've built around us.
Most definitely. By the end of this episode, you should hopefully walk away with an understanding, not just what these drugs, these GLP-1s do, but how to think about them, how to use GLPs, GIPs intelligently if you use them at all, and why a pill alone or an injection alone, no matter how powerful, will never be the entire answer. It's not that simple.
All right, so let's get into it, Nish. Why don't you start us off here?
All right. Can we just talk about the scale obsession for a second? Because it makes me crazy. I mean, there's lots of things that make me crazy. But
like most of this last week
made me crazy. But this makes me insane.
Not your reformer class, though.
No, my reformer class was totally calming. I would do it again.
Our oldest had tennis tryouts at 6 a.m. every day this week.
We hosted a Japanese exchange student for the week.
Which was great. But yeah. It's a lot of work.
Great experience. But yeah, it was definitely cramming more into our lives than we can handle. But anyway, back to the scale obsession. People will text me all the time, right? My friends, I hit a plateau on my GLP-1. And my first question is always, are you resistance training? Are you hitting your protein? And usually the answer is no, right? They're drinking alcohol, starving themselves, or eating whatever sounds tolerable, loving the way that they look in clothes, but naked is probably a whole different story, still obsessing over that number on the scale. So what do? They go up on their dose of GLP-1 and that scale moves again and they're thrilled. But what just happened? They didn't lose fat, they lost muscle, right?
And I want people to hear what Nisha's saying here because this is kind of the single most important part of the nuance in the entire GLP-1 conversation.
Yep. Muscle is an organ, right? We've said that in previous episodes. It's the organ of longevity. It regulates your blood glucose. Muscle is what protects your joints from injury. Muscle is what's going to keep you out of a nursing home. And it's the thing that stands between you and frailty at 75. And you are burning fat at rest when you have more muscle. So it's not just the number on the scale that you want to worry about. It's the difference between fat and your femur.
I think the analogy is always kind of jarring, but it is accurate.
Yeah. I want people to really hear this. So let me ask you something. Everyone think, if I asked you, hey, I can get that number on the scale down 10 more pounds, but I need to take out one of your kidneys. Would you do it?
Sign me up.
What if I said I'll remove a chunk of your femur, your hip bone, right? Just to watch that number drop on a scale? You would say, absolutely not. That's crazy. But that's what's happening with unregulated GLP-1 use. People are on these high dose GLP-1s willy-nilly, no protein target, no resistance training, no DEXA scan, zero plan, and they are burning through their most protective organ for the sake of a number, right? And then they come off the drug and they gain the fat back. But the muscle, that muscle doesn't come back. And that muscle is never going to come back without that serious work. So my rant is over. Let's get into why any of this is happening in the first place.
Thank you for the rant. All right, we're going to get there. So I want to start with the foundation that makes all this really make sense. And that's really evolutionary context, because if you don't really understand why these drugs are so powerful in the way they work, you're not going to understand some of the stakes of using them incorrectly. So let's go back, 200,000 years.
I love how you draw on history, and we love a good prehistoric cold open.
200,000 years. So early Homo sapiens, life is physically pretty demanding. Calorie acquisition requires true effort. You have to hunt, forage, you have to carry food long distances after you catch it or gather it. You have to actually find ways to process it. Calories are scarce and they're pretty unpredictable, often seasonal. You might eat really well for 1 week and then almost eat nothing the next week. And that's not really that we have to keep that into context, because we have to understand what our body does that allows us to survive and reproduce. It has to do with how we are actually storing those calories when they are in abundance, and then what happens when they're scarce.
For sure. It's a body that is exquisitely good at finding and eating calorie-dense foods, storing energy efficiently, and being very reluctant to give that energy back. And that's not a flaw. That's precisely what kept the lineage alive for thousands of years.
Exactly. Evolution gave us incredibly powerful biological drives. It gave us reward circuits that light up intensely for fat storage and to crave sugar. It gave us hunger hormones that are persistent and persuasive in our daily life, and a metabolic governor that downregulates when you lose weight to try to get that weight back. Every single one of those mechanisms was truly a survival advantage when calories are scarce. And this is the fundamental evolutionary mismatch we talk about so much in our framework. The biology is ancient. The food environment that we live in is brand new. We basically have taken, we took the most hyper palatable, calorie dense substances that humans could ever engineer, refined carbohydrates, seed oils, ultra processed foods with perfectly calibrated ratios of salt, fat, and sugar. And we made them super cheap, abundant, and basically inescapable. And then we're surprised that people are gaining weight. as if willpower is going to win against millions of years of selective pressure telling your brain when calorie dense food is available, go and eat it.
Yeah, the data on this is sobering. In 1960, about 13% of Americans were obese. But in 2020, that number was 42%, more than tripled. And the rates of severe obesity, a BMI over 40, has quadrupled. And over that same period of time, we were telling people to eat less and move more. If that advice wasn't sufficient, we would have seen different numbers.
So let's talk about the specific hormonal machinery involved, because this directly sets up why GLP-1s really work so well. There are two major hunger-related hormone systems you need to understand. The first is ghrelin, the hunger hormone itself. It's produced in your stomach, rises before meals, falls after eating, and acts on your brain to increase appetite and then drive you towards food.
Yeah, and the second system involves satiety signals. And those are hormones that tell you to stop eating, like when you're full, right? The most important ones for our conversation today are GLP-1, which stands for glucagon-like peptide 1, and GIP, which stands for glucose-dependent insulinotropic polypeptide. So these are released by your gut. So they're naturally occurring substances in your gut that respond to food, and they do several things simultaneously. They stimulate insulin secretion, they suppress glucagon, they slow gastric emptying, and critically, they signal the brain, especially a region called the hypothalamus in your brain, to reduce appetite and create satiety. So that's that feeling of being full.
And here's the key problem in modern obesity. That satiety system is often dysregulated or overpowered. The reward signal from ultra processed foods can overwhelm the satiety signal. You eat a bag of chips and your GLP-1 and GIP, they go up. Your brain knows you've consumed calories, but the dopamine hit from the engineered palatability of those chips keeps driving the behavior despite the signals. The stop signal basically just gets drowned out. And on top of that, for many people with obesity, there's evidence that the GLP-1 response itself just becomes blunted, meaning the satiety signal is less robust to begin with, which further tilts the playing field. So you have a food environment that's really engineered for to override your satiety. A reward system evolved to never say no to available calories, and then a satiety hormone that's already just underperforming. This is not really a fight that you can win with just willpower. There's another piece of this that doesn't really get talked about enough, and there's neuroimaging data. Studies using brain MRIs have shown that people with obesity showing images of high calorie food produces greater activation in those reward centers. The nucleus accumbens, which is in the orbitofrontal cortex, if you compare that to people with normal weight, the overweight people have overactivation in those reward centers. The brain is literally just more reactive to those food cues. And here's the remarkable thing about GLP-1 medications. Those same neuroimaging studies done on patients taking semaglutide show dramatically reduced activation of those reward centers in response to the same food images. The drug is not just like reducing hunger, it's also quieting that neurological clamor going on in the brain.
Yeah, what you're saying is this is what patients mean when they're talking about that food noise, that constant quest for food or junk, and that goes away. So it's not a metaphor, it's measurable neurobiology. And I think that's one of the most profound reframes in all of metabolic medicine right now. The shame and moralizing around weight it's really not helpful. it's scientifically inaccurate. So our biology is not a character flaw. And I think that's what all of us failed to recognize.
And before we move on, I want to add one more evolutionary thread here because it connects directly to why the compounding, access crisis that we're going to discuss in part 2 matters so much. We evolved to respond to famine, not really to respond to abundance, because there was no abundance. The mechanisms for shutting off eating in an environment of unlimited, engineered, hyper-palatable food, we don't have those. We never needed them through our entire evolution. And the drugs we're about to discuss are, in a sense, the first time that medicine has been able to pharmacologically insert that missing piece for us.
All right, so let's dive into the drugs themselves and get into the pharmacology.
And I want to do this in a way that's clinically honest, without turning it into a true pharmacology lecture. Nisha, why don't you walk us through the generations of these drugs?
Sure. So the drugs that really made headlines several years ago were liraglutide, which is Victoza, Saxenda, and then semaglutide, which most people know as Ozempic for type 2 diabetes or Wegovy for obesity. So semaglutide is a synthetic version of our natural GLP-1 hormone. So we all produce, like we mentioned, GLP-1 hormone naturally in our gut. And it is engineered to stay in the body for far longer in these pharmacological forms. So natural GLP-1 breaks down in minutes, and semaglutide has a half-life of about a week, which is why normally this is a once a week injection. So the weight loss results in these step trials were remarkable. About 15% of average body weight loss over 68 weeks. So just over a year. Prior anti-obesity meds, it was about 5 to 8%. So really these meds were the first on the market to kind of cause this cascade of real profound weight loss.
Yeah, then we got tirzepatide. So Mounjaro is the branded version for diabetes, same drug, Zepbound for obesity. And this is different because it was a dual agonist targeting both the GLP-1 as well as the GIP receptor simultaneously. So there's this trial, the SURMOUNT trials, showed even more impressive results than the Ozempic trials. So the highest dose achieved about 22% average total body weight reduction, with some patients losing 30% or more. That's approaching what we used to see really only with bariatric surgery.
Yeah, those gastric sleeves, right?
Gastric sleeve or gastric bypass surgery. And you're getting all this just with a weekly subcutaneous injection. Mechanistically, the addition of the GIP activity seems to work synergistically or in conjunction with the GLP-1, and not just in terms of weight loss, but also in terms of tolerability. Many patients report they have fewer nausea side effects with tirzepatide than they did with semaglutide, which is really clinically meaningful because tolerability is often what determines whether someone can stay on a medicine long-term or not.
Yeah. And then there's the next frontier that we talked about, Reta. Reta, which is a triple agonist. It's GLP-1, GIP, and a glucagon receptor agonist, all in one molecule. Phase 2 trials showed average weight loss of about 24% at the highest dose over 48 weeks, with some participants approaching 40% total body weight reduction. Phase 3 trials are ongoing, and the data coming out in the next year or two could really change the treatment landscape as we know it.
The glucagon component is what makes retatrutide so fascinating from an energy expenditure standpoint. Glucagon doesn't just suppress appetite, it actually increases thermogenesis and fat oxidation. So you're reducing intake. And then on top of that, you're actually increasing caloric burn simultaneously. It's a dual mechanism intervention in just this one single molecule. Mechanistically, all of these drugs work both centrally in your brain as well as peripherally, acting on the hypothalamus in the brain and the hindbrain to reduce appetite and quiet that food noise, while peripherally, they're slowing gastric emptying in our stomach. They're stimulating insulin secretion in a glucose dependent way, and they're suppressing glucagon from the pancreas.
All right, so let's touch on side effects of all of these, right? Semaglutide, tirzepatide, reta, the side effects. So we want to be honest here. The most common are these GI side effects, the gastrointestinal side effects, nausea, vomiting, constipation. Sometimes patients get diarrhea. These are the most pronounced during the first few weeks of when you first start the medication or when we're increasing the dose. And for most people, they improve significantly with time, which is why slow titration is that standard protocol that we like to use. We like to keep patients on at least a month of the same dose before titrating up. There's also a subset of patients who experience more prolonged gastroparesis like symptoms, which is that slowing of the gut. So they feel real constipated, bloated. There are ongoing discussions about that rare association with pancreatitis and gallbladder disease. This is why we counsel our patients not to heavily drink on these medications. And these absolute risks remain low, but they definitely deserve this individual risk factor discussion. There's an FDA boxed warning about some thyroid C-cell tumors and carcinomas based on some animal studies that have not yet been replicated in humans, but it remains a contraindication with a personal or a family history of medullary thyroid carcinomas or MEN2.
These aren't trivial medications, and they're not without risk. That's not a reason to necessarily avoid them when they're indicated. It's a reason to work with a physician who actually understands them, monitors them appropriately, and has a plan beyond just writing the prescription. I think, especially initially, like during the pandemic in the ER, I saw quite a few patients coming in with vomiting, with pancreatitis, and those gastroparesis symptoms because the escalation of dose was happening too fast. The people who were prescribing them, I'm not knocking on nurse practitioners, but there's a lot of NP clinics that were writing these prescriptions and writing them way too quickly, starting people not on as an initial dose. And that led to a lot of this. We don't see it nearly as much now.
All right, let's move on to the pill form, these oral GLP formats, which are the new frontier of these medications. And this is one of the things that I'm genuinely most excited about because it expands access. And these oral formats, because when most people are thinking about GLP-1s, they think injections. They're weekly injections. And for a significant portion of patients, needle aversion is a real barrier, right? It's much easier to take a pill than it is to inject yourself.
100%. The first oral GLP-1 to market was Rybelsus. It's oral semaglutide for type 2 diabetes, actually available since 2019, but it has a very specific protocol that a lot of patients get wrong.
I think that's the hard part. You have to take that oral medication on an empty stomach with no more than 4 ounces of plain water, not coffee, not juice, tea, nothing else. And you have to wait at least 30 minutes before eating, drinking, or taking other medications. And the reason is that GLP-1, it is a peptide, and peptides are normally destroyed in the stomach by our stomach acids and enzymes before they can even be absorbed by our body. So that oral semaglutide uses an absorption enhancer called SNAC, and that briefly buffers that stomach pH and allows that semaglutide to absorb directly through the gastric mucosa. But I know how many of us, the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning, like before I even talk to you, I'm like, don't even look at me. I need a cup of coffee. So it is really hard to follow that protocol.
Yeah. So, that 30-minute fast, it's not arbitrary. It's pharmacologically essential. If you eat right away, absorption drops dramatically. This is the number one adherence failure we see with Rybelsus. People treat it like any other pill, and it just isn't.
Yeah, you can't take it with your blood pressure pills or your cholesterol pills or your supplements, your vitamin D. And I think that's a fallacy is a lot of people think because, oh, it's not as effective. No, you just have to take it correctly, which how many of us do? That's really hard. So weight loss from standard dose of these oral meds was definitely more modest than injectable form. And that's partly because of the bioavailability, which is inherently lower with the oral delivery. And we talked about the reasons why. And now some of these drug companies have developed higher dose formulations and they're testing it at higher doses specifically for obesity in people without diabetes. And the results were pretty striking. Average weight loss was about 15% over 68 weeks, essentially matching what we saw in those injectable step trials. And that's the same efficacy from a pill as we get from a weekly injection, which is a huge pharmacological engineering achievement, right? If we can package something into a pill, it's much easier to deliver to patients. So the FDA approves oral semaglutide at 25 and 50 milligrams under the brand name of Wegovy. So that's a real option for patients and really nice for those patients that don't like doing injections on themselves.
What about the side effect profile of the pills?
Yeah, generally these oral ones are pretty comparable. Some patients report GI side effects, slightly more, especially when they're front loading and first starting the medication with the oral medication, the oral version versus the injectable one, especially at those higher doses. But that same slow titration protocol applies, right? We're not starting high dose right away. And now there's oral tirzepatide. The phase 3 trials are underway, which is really exciting. The phase 2 data was super promising. And given how tirzepatide's injectable form, that outperforms semaglutide. And now there's an effective oral version coming out of tirzepatide. This would be a huge development and really kind of propel our patients forward. We're excited to kind of see what's coming through the pipeline.
So the broader point here is important. The barrier to these medications is changing pretty rapidly. A year ago, if you weren't comfortable with injections, your options were limited. Now there's genuine oral options, and they match pretty much the injectable efficacy. And there's also an active pipeline for these once daily formats, extended release tablets, even sublingual delivery. The technology around getting peptide drugs to survive oral administration, which was historically almost impossible, is advancing really fast and much faster than people expected. On just the front of patient selection, though, the clinical decision, it isn't purely about just like needle phobia. The oral semaglutide requires a consistent fasting window, which is really a lifestyle consideration. Patients with unpredictable early schedules or who take multiple morning medications with food, they really may find that there's difficulty with adherence. For patients, the once weekly injection actually has a simplicity advantage. You take it once, any time of the day, with or without food, and you're basically done. The key is really just matching that effective regimen to the patient rather than matching the patient to the regimen.
You had mentioned the bioavailability of peptides. There are so many patients spending boatloads of money on these oral peptides. I know I'm digressing. GLP-1 is a peptide, but there's so many other peptides available. These Instagram ads of buy this peptide in this pill form. So really, these are just really expensive formulations that you're peeing or pooping out because the bioavailability, your stomach acid literally destroys these peptides right away. So like you said, these FDA approved studies are awesome because it proves that they found the technology to make these oral peptides bioavailable, but that's not the supplement industry.
I just wrote on our Substack about BP 157, BBC 157, the total number of patients in a clinical trial that have received BPC 157 is 14. 14 people have used this compound in a clinical trial setting. There was another 42 that had gotten it. That trial was registered and closed in under a year and never reported any results. So then when, some compounding pharmacy says that, oh, we have an oral formulation of this peptide available, where's the data that says that, oh, this is actually just as bioavailable as the injectable version, which we know is bioavailable? It's the Wild West. It's the complete Wild West.
Yeah, it's like the cognitive dissonance. People are so willing to try a product that's never been tested, but when it comes to FDA approved medications like statins, they're like, I'm skeptical. I don't know. It just baffles me.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
All right. So let's kind of talk about some of the clinical benefits beyond just the scale, right? And there are like true, real benefits to these medications, and it's worth spending some real time on. The systemic clinical benefits go far beyond what we see on the scale. These are not just weight loss drugs.
Yeah. And this is where that longevity framework really crystallizes. You've talked about your 6 horsemen model, right? Metabolic dysfunction, which sits upstream of almost every major killer: cardiovascular disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, and other forms of dementia, frailty, and mood disorder. These are drugs that are hitting multiple nodes of that pathology simultaneously. And that's pretty extraordinary.
Let's start with cardiovascular disease, because this is pretty landmark and practice-changing data. The SELECT trial with semaglutide was a massive study, right? 17,000 participants with who are overweight or obese and already had established cardiovascular disease. But critically, these patients did not have diabetes. In this trial, it showed us that there was a 20% reduction in major adverse cardiac events. That means heart attacks, strokes, cardiovascular death, 20%. And these are in people who were not even diabetic.
Yeah, and the mechanism debate is pretty fascinating. The cardiovascular benefits of GLP-1s appear to exceed what you'd expect from normal weight loss alone, even accounting for that 15% body weight reduction. And these drugs seem to have a direct effect on inflammation and reducing it. So they reduce visceral adiposity, which is not just cosmetically undesirable. You've heard us rant about visceral fat, which is that biologically active tissue, which is pumping out pro-inflammatory cytokines and free fatty acids directly into our circulation. These GLP-1s have a profound impact on visceral fat, which has downstream effects on insulin sensitivity, blood pressure, your cholesterol, and your vascular inflammation simultaneously.
So then there's the kidney data. The FLOW trial with semaglutide in patients with type 2 diabetes and chronic kidney disease showed a 24% reduction in the composite outcome of kidney disease progression, end-stage kidney disease, and kidney or cardiovascular death. This is a population, right, diabetic patients with established chronic kidney disease, where we have historically had very limited pharmacological options and truly very poor prognosis. The nephrology world really took serious notice of this.
The liver data is also pretty compelling. So there's something called NASH, which is non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, basically fatty liver, which affects somewhere between 10 and 30% of Americans to varying degrees. And that's becoming the leading driver of liver transplant waiting lists. Both semaglutide and tirzepatide trials have showed not just reductions in liver fat on imaging, but on histological studies, which is that if they do a liver biopsy. And that's actual evidence of cellular healing. So that's not something we should just say about very many medications, that literally at the cellular level, it's improving.
All right. Now there is the neurological data. This is where I find things especially compelling from a really long game perspective. GLP-1 receptors are expressed throughout the brain, not just in the appetite centers. There's accumulating observational data and now emerging prospective trial data suggesting that GLP-1 agonist use is associated with meaningfully lower rates of Alzheimer's diagnosis and cognitive decline. One large analysis comparing semaglutide users to matched controls on other diabetes medications found significantly lower rates of Alzheimer's with hazard ratios that were truly clinically meaningful. The EVOKE trials are now testing semaglutide specifically for Alzheimer's disease, and the scientific community is watching pretty closely.
Yeah, the proposed mechanism include reduced neuroinflammation, improved insulin sensitivity signaling to the brain, because we've coined, right, Alzheimer's, we've called this type 3 diabetes, and a lot of researchers use that term, right? And it improves cerebrovascular health from the cardiovascular effects and possibly direct neuroprotective effects at that GLP-1 receptor itself.
We should also touch upon sleep apnea. So the SURMOUNT OSA trial with tirzepatide showed approximately a 50% reduction in apnea, hypopnea index. If you understand the downstream effects of untreated sleep apnea, which is cardiovascular stress, cortisol dysregulation, glucose metabolism disruption, cognitive impairment, a 50% reduction in AHI is not a minor footnote. It's transformative, truly, for quality of life and for long-term health.
Yeah. There's also genuinely exciting emerging data in the addiction medicine space, which is really exciting. GLP-1 receptors in the mesolimbic dopamine pathway, that reward circuit that we get, appear to modulate not just food reward, but reward seeking behavior broadly. So we have patients all the time that say, like, yeah, I'm not really craving that alcohol that I normally like to drink at the end of the night, or even their phone, or whatever addictive behaviors that they're used to completing. So there are now clinical trials and observational analyses that show reduced alcohol consumption, reduced cravings, and signals in even an opioid use disorder as well. So this is opening up an entirely new chapter in addiction medicine, which is exciting.
It's pretty fascinating because I think it really touches on the fact that we know that addiction is a central nervous system phenomena, and the fact that these medications work in the central nervous system in these reward centers, it's going to be pretty fascinating to see what these results end up coming out as the clinical trials close. I'll add one more that doesn't get talked about enough, and really that's the early data on cancer risk reduction, particularly for obesity-associated cancers. So those are commonly like the big major ones, though there's more colorectal, endometrial, and pancreatic. The mechanistic pathways make some true biological sense. So you reduce insulin, you reduce IGF-1, reduce subsequently chronic inflammation. The observational data is beginning to bear this out. This is still emerging, and we need a true prospective trial showing data, but there's definitely some signal there that these medications are reducing cancer rates.
All right. So the big picture takeaway, GLP-1s may be the most consequential pharmacological intervention in, I would say, medicine overall, since statins, perhaps. So more consequential than statins. Would you agree?
It's possible. I think we don't have enough time data yet, right? Statins, the number of deaths that have prevented is huge, but they've also been around for over 40 years now.
Yeah.
I think we're going to eclipse that in a much shorter period of time with the GLP, GIP agonists.
Yeah. But like statins, GLP-1s need to be used thoughtfully, right? In the right patients with appropriate monitoring, DEXA scan, and as part of a broader health strategy, right? Not as a vending machine prescription that it's kind of become.
I think this is probably a perfect segue, because part 2 of this series is where we really dig into exactly that. It's the hard clinical realities of muscle loss, of weight regain, the compounding pharmacy crisis, and what a genuinely intelligent protocol really would look like. But first, let's kind of bring home part 1 here.
All right. Part 1 recap. What do we cover, Vikas?
We started with that evolutionary foundation, why our satiety biology was never designed for this current food environment that we've created. We talked about ghrelin, GLP-1, GIP, the hyperpalatable food problem, some of the neuroimaging data on reward center overactivation, the biological reality that obesity, it's just not a character flaw.
Right. And we walk through the drug generations, semaglutide, tirzepatide, reta, the injectable landscape from the first generation GLP-1 to the triple agonist, which may even break any record we've ever seen. We've covered the mechanism of action of these GLP, GIP drugs, the trial numbers, the side effect profile, and the patient selection nuance as well.
We also covered the oral formats, Rybelsus, the new high-dose oral semaglutide at 50 milligrams, matching truly like the injectable efficacy, the new oral tirzepatide trials, and this category is just evolving pretty fast.
Yep. And we spent time on some of the benefits beyond weight loss, cardiovascular benefits, liver healing, kidney protection, Alzheimer's prevention, addiction medicine, the addiction medicine frontier. These GLP-1 drugs are pretty remarkable.
Part 2 is where we make all this clinically actionable. So we're going to cover the muscle loss data, why it matters for longevity, and what specifically to do about it. We're going to cover the weight regain issues, what the step 4 trials tell us, the homeostatic biology, and what lifestyle actually has to look like if you want to sustain long-term results. We're also going to talk about the compounding pharmacy situation, what's safe, what's not, and how to tell the difference. And then we'll kind of give the full, 5-6 pillar protocol that we use at MD Longevity for patients who are on these medications.
Yeah. Part 2 is a must for anyone that is on a GLP-1. Don't just listen to part 1 and skip part 2. Part 2 is something I literally want to scream from the rooftops at everyone on one of these medications, which is so many people. And I can stand in a lineup and be like, you're going to fail, you're going to fail, you're going to fail. And I wish you had the cliff notes for how to be successful on these meds, because they've just been given these meds blindly and they're spinning their tires. So we do not want you guys spinning your tires. These medications are incredible tools if used correctly.
I think one of the things that it's useful to think about, right? Like, I totally get that semaglutide works, tirzepatide works better, and most likely retatrutide works even better. But for a lot of people who are not, say, morbidly obese, they don't need like the triple agonist, right? Just because it works the best does not mean it's giving you the best outcome for your health, because how rapid the weight comes off, it's a problem if it's happening in a way that you're so calorie reduced that you're losing muscle at the same time that you're losing fat. So I think part 2 will be a really good discussion about how these medicines should be utilized.
And I think we've made a big dent with patients, right? Like when we show them on their DEXA scan, especially the patients that are not morbidly obese that are on GLP-1s, you lost 4 pounds of muscle and 2 pounds of fat. Is this medication worth it? And for a lot of them, that's a wake-up call of, do I need to be on this medication if I'm losing twice the amount of muscle as fat? Or for women who are my age, doesn't make sense, even if it's at a 1-to-1 ratio. For most women, no way.
We know how to game the system so that we're not losing, and we're not losing muscle nearly as quickly as we're losing fat. And I think there's true utility in these drugs if you know how to use them properly.
Yep. And we hope this episode's been useful. Please leave us a review, share it with someone who's been asking for Ozempic and getting a 10-second answer. So that's pretty much why we made this episode. We had a lot of requests to cover GLP-1s.
Yes. Also, please check out our new Substack. I'm trying to put out articles that will take some of these topics a little bit more in depth. Other than that, we're going to hopefully catch up on some sleep this week.
Yep. All right. Stay tuned for part 2, where we cover GLPs and how to be successful on them.
Thank you for playing the long game with MD Longevity Lab. You can visit us at www.mdlongevitylab.com to learn more about how we can support you on your journey. Stay connected with us on social media at MD Longevity Lab for tips, updates, and behind-the-scenes insights. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love it if you subscribed, left us a rating, or shared it with someone you know who's also playing the long game. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.